Hello from Tel Aviv. Welcome to today's panel. Everybody can take now their masks off, and we'll get to the business of understanding how the startup ecosystems can get through the economic implications of the corona pandemic we're facing. My name is Guy, and I'm the Innovation and Technology Officer at the Austrian AußenwirtschaftsCenter in Tel Aviv. We would like to thank also our colleagues from the British Department of International Trade for their assistance in bringing this together. Before we start, let's take a few seconds to make sure that we all get the most out of this meeting. We hope that the panel discussion will be fueled by your active participation. We will address the questions during the talk, and if not, at the end will be a Q&A session, and we hope we'll have time to answer all the questions that come up. I will be receiving the questions on my mobile phone, so please excuse me if I'm looking at it from time to time. And now let's get to it. We're excited to have three experts today representing the startup ecosystems in Israel, the UK, and Austria. I will now ask them to turn on their cameras and microphones and join us. We have, hi Anya.
Hello.
Hi Tony. Hello Michael, you're with us too, great.
Hello.
So let's go by order. We have Michael Altrichter, the newly appointed Austrian Startup Commissioner. We have Anya Eldan, VP of the Israel Innovation Authority and head of the Startup Division. And we have Tony Kypreos, an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist serving as a deal maker in the British Global Entrepreneur Program. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Again, welcome and thank you for joining us for this session today, in which we hope that by sharing your wealth of experience in this ecosystem, we can provide our viewers some insights as to what to expect and how to best cope with the looming global crisis. So, first, I will ask each of you to briefly tell us of your experience in the startup ecosystem and the scope of your current position. Since you each represent a different country, maybe you should start by providing a short definition of what is considered a startup in your country, just to give us the right context. And ladies first, Anya, please.
Hi, I'm Anya Eldan, Vice President of the Israel Innovation Authority. Israel Innovation Authority is a government agency entrusted with supporting the high-tech and life sciences industry. Our goal is economic. We spend about 500 million euros a year supporting about 1,500 different innovative projects. And Israel is known still as a startup nation. We have about 6,000 startups at any given time. The definitions vary, so we like to say startup is somebody who still has to raise money, who is not yet break even, but you can take any definition.
Okay, thank you, Anya. And maybe you could add about yourself. How long have you been in this business? Where you came from?
Okay. Well, I joined the government 5 years ago after 30 years in the industry. I managed digital health companies. I was a venture capitalist for 10 years. And many years ago, I even started computer programming. So lots of industry experience, but into government agency that has changed quite a lot during those years.
Yeah, that certainly has. Okay, Tony, you're up next. Please tell us about the British ecosystem and about yourself.
Thank you, Guy, and thank you, Advise Austria, for organizing today. And Shalom, Tel Aviv. I wish I could be there personally with you, but maybe next time. So
it's about 42 degrees. I don't think you want to be here.
Okay, maybe another time then. So in terms of my role here today and what I'm representing, I'm here as the Department of International Trade. We have a program called the Global Entrepreneur Program. And what we do is there are a group of experienced entrepreneurs who have been through the system and cycle, both successes and failures several times with some gray hairs to prove it. And what we are is we scout the world and look around for many of the world's best founders and best tech entrepreneurs. And we suggest to them that if they want to grow globally and they want to raise capital and internationalize, we can help them with a global HQ in the UK, maintaining operations in their domestic markets. So I think in the last 15 years, the program's been running. There's been over 500 companies, raised over 1.5 billion. I think created about 30,000 new jobs and these sort of things, with a number of notable good quality startups. So it's very non-intrusive, it's very supportive in that way, and it's been a very, very good for the UK ecosystem, I'd say. In terms of the UK startup ecosystem, it's pretty mature and pretty solid, I would say. So in terms of venture capital, 2019 was the biggest year ever. It grew 44% to over £10 billion, which makes it number 3 in the world. So it's been going in that way. And like Anya, I would, the definition of a startup is very wide. And I know startups been going. I know companies been going for 12 years and they still call themselves startups. So it varies by industry. But again, I'd say a company that could be breaking even and making money, but is still seeking capital for growth, would be considered as a startup in our opinion, particularly when it's got a technology foundation.
And a few words about your personal experience and background?
In terms of the ecosystem, I'd say there's 3 dimensions. So I've been a corporate leader. So I've been on the executive board of T-Mobile International in Germany, and also done some M&As and turnarounds and an NASDAQ IPO. As also the second dimension, I'd say, is as a founder myself, which would resonate with many of the audience. So I've sat on your side of the pain of the position. So my last venture, like Anya, was in digital health, which I exited in 2017. And the last I mentioned would be as a VC and angel investor, which I've made a number of investments, both personally and for T Ventures.
Great, thank you. Michael, now to you, and also tell us about the showbiz. You're still there?
Yeah, hello to everybody of the webinar. Welcome. Yeah, my name is Michael Altrichter, and now I'm 20 years in the startup business. The first 10 years I was co-founder of a company called PaySafeCard, which was one of the biggest exits here in Austria. And the later 10 years, I'm a very active business angel. I have now investments in more than 30 companies. I was appointed the Business Angel of the Year back in 2014. And as you said, I was 5 seasons now in the startup show, 2 Minuten, 2 Millionen. It's the Shark Tank type TV show in Austria, 2 Minute, 2 Million, which was quite amazing. And I was very happy to be part of the jury there. And half of my investments came out of this TV show. However, now currently I'm working on my own TV show. It's not too early to talk about it. We have already produced a pilot, which is not yet on air. But yeah, this is the side of the TV branch. So I'm a business angel. I have my own TV show soon. And just recently, a few weeks ago, I was appointed as Startup-Beauftragter, so which is to English translate the commissioner, startup commissioner, which is freelancer role. So I'm not not too much on the political side. It's an unpaid role where it's an advisor role where I advise and support the government in terms of startup agendas. What is, as you asked, well, maybe first to the Austrian ecosystem. I think I represent here with the two of you, Anya and Tony. I represent a country which I might call as the junior partner out of here. Austria's ecosystem in startups is rather small compared to your and the international scale. The total investments in Austria's startup ecosystem is a few €100 million. We're working on this to make it 10 times bigger. And it's a quite novice, small startup scene, but a nice and growing one. And as you asked, what is actually a startup? For me, there's a clear definition. If you don't have a product, if you don't know how to make money, and if you don't know your customers, then you are a startup. So, having said that, so if you can answer one of these questions, you are no longer a startup anymore. No, there's of course a real definition. You have to be somehow disruptive in the technology, and you have to show a hyper growth potential. So these are the two main responsibilities. And of course, you should not be older than 5 or 10 years. So then you are considered as a startup in Austria. And from numbers, we have a few thousand startups here, maybe some 2,000 to 3,000 startups. And every year we're talking about maybe 400 to 500 new startups.
Okay. Thank you. Now, Michael, I will ask you also at the macroeconomic level, how do you view the effect of the expected global economic crisis on the startup ecosystem in Austria?
Well, there's a broad range of impact from some, or actually the majority of startups are hit severely. However, there is a part of startups which even profit from the crisis. For example, I saw a company in Austria which is doing a video conferencing system. They of course gained a lot of business coming out of the crisis. So the impact is from like destroying, for example, Turada is very international, very well known portal of a package tours provider, and they were of course severely hit by the crisis. 95% of their businesses broke down, although they had more work to do, all this cancellation stuff. So the majority is hit, or a part of the startups is hit severely, and others are hit not so severely, and even a few can profit out of the scene.
What is it like in Israel, Anya? How do you see it?
So I think we see two different segments. One thing is we had a lot of venture capital money over the last few years, like billions of venture capital money. And we find a lot of startups have been complacent. We just finished a study yesterday, and I'm saying it first time here. Over half of the startups say they have less than 6 months runway, which means that they're gonna run out of cash in 6 months, which means they have to start fundraising immediately. And of course, money is no longer plentiful because a lot of venture capitalists are only dealing with their portfolio and have stopped investing in new companies. So there is quite a crisis. On the other hand, there are quite a lot of investors who are very eager to profit from the opportunity. The times of crisis, if you have cash, you can bring valuations down, you can get into very good companies which maybe weren't available to you in the past. So the other half of the market is actively seeking new deals. So there is a balance. And I agree with Michael, there is a huge opportunity. We always say the best companies are born during crisis. So there is a huge opportunity in digital health, unbelievable, big deals. There's huge opportunity in bioconvergence, in the future advanced medical solutions, which is the strategy we're pushing. So we see both an opportunity and a crisis.
Okay, thank you. Tony, what's your angle on this?
Well, I like what Anya said, an opportunity and a crisis. They're very good last words. It depends on circumstances. You know, I think there's serious crisis in major corporations in certain sectors, and I think there's many sectors outside of what we're talking about now that is in a much worse situation than the startup economy. The UK is pretty lucky in a way because it's got a strong foundation, and so the changes have had to be adaptations rather than complete, you know, turnarounds. There's a lot of dry powder available both in the US and the UK, where VCs are sitting on a lot of cash. But as Anya has said, you know, they're holding back. And as a startup, I could say you're probably one of three startups. One is your portfolio company in a well-established VC where you're pretty safe. You're going to be supported, and your working capital is going to be given. They may even increase their investment in you to make you take advantage of opportunities for growth. The second one is and this is the companies I'm dealing with right now, where you were just about to close a deal with a VC, and at 1 minute you're valued at 12 million, the next minute you're arguing over 6 to 8 million, just within a few weeks. And the key thing there is to persuade your investors or to demonstrate that either A, your issue is your cash flow issue or your pipeline is due to a bit of friction or a very small blip for 3 months, or B, it's a state of demand, a long-term depression. So you have to convince them it's A, and to try and get the money, but you will be hit on valuation. You may even be hit in terms of terms and preference share multiples. And the third section, I think, as Anya mentioned, if you're a startup with less than 1 year's runway without having started any discussions for investment, you better learn how to bootstrap or have learned how to bootstrap, because you're going to need to, and you're going to learn how to use the time effectively to think creatively about what you're going to do. And this is where the art of scenario planning hasn't really been used by startups before, and Sequoia have a matrix and many have a matrix to try and think about what is it you control and what is it you cannot control, and to look at different mitigations and adaptations around it. So I would suggest that any founder right now, in the year's time, has to be able to tell a sophisticated investor, what did you do during COVID? And it's got to be much more than just saying we cut costs or we furloughed employees. They've got to be looking at other sectors, other adaptations of their technology. They've got to be taking advantage of the time they have available right now.
Okay.
Great point.
Yeah. Michael, which fields or verticals do you expect will gain from this crisis? You already began to mention it a bit, but who do you think will gain and who do you think will take longer recuperating or might even become obsolete?
Well, generally on a global scale, I see that this globalization hype, what we followed over the past years and decades, has come to a peak. We all have seen this borderless people movement and goods outsourced to offshore destinations has also a huge backdraw, and this is a pain in everybody of us, including decision maker politicians. It was good to shift everything to offshore if you cut the price by half. But now we have seen, and not only in the medical thing, or medical sector, that is not a good decision. So there will be a back offshoring, I think, over the next years, at least of the medical critical things, as well as this utility thing, water, electricity, and so on. So we will have a much stricter view on that, who is running this business and who is owning it, and we will, as I said, back offshoring. So this is one. And secondly, especially for Austria is well known as a tourism and culture nature with a state opera and so on. And I think we will use this as the next innovation, how to say, hype or innovation field, that we transform our strength into the digital age, that the branches at culture tech or even tourism tech and those things and will grow in Austria. As I said in an interview before, Austria is not having the biggest startup ecosystem, but we can have our strength in certain fields. There's the gap to you guys in Israel, UK, or Silicon Valley is actually too big for us in Austria to come up with this gap. But when we look or find our own destination where Austria is well known for and where our strengths are, then we have a good chance to come up with it. And that's why I believe that there might be certain areas where startups can have their strength, and Austria might be an international hub on those sectors.
Yeah, like in other traditional sectors, the hidden champions.
Yeah, right. So skiing and culture and tourism and stuff like that.
Anya, we've been there before in some way or another, whether in 2008 or 2000. Where do you see the similarities? What's different now? What were your main takes from previous crises?
Yeah, well, just that 30 years in the industry, so I've been through a couple of crises. I think it's pretty similar. So the first thing that happens is that the investors stop investing or only take care of their portfolio. And the second thing, corporate investors disappear and start thinking very hard, are we spending money wisely? And all of a sudden, in the areas like Industry 4.0, where you used to see a lot of corporate money, it just stops. And I remember from 2001, even though it was the internet and all the huge valuations, so the heavy technology also stopped. So I think everything stops for a while. I think last crisis, 2008, we saw the venture capital return after 2 years. So in the beginning, the VCs that have the money keep it for their portfolio. The VCs that don't have the money, it's going to take them a year or two to raise more money. So there is a crisis. We're looking at a minimum of 18 months runway for companies to survive the crisis. And we spend government money to support the industry, so our immediate response programs have to do with exactly that. How do we help good companies survive the next 18 months? And that's where we're targeting everything. But you see, the thing that happened this time that I think is very different is, of course, there's no travel. So it's not just financial crisis. There is really no travel. So a lot of companies, like I have a lot of companies that I work with who are in the life sciences. Of course, all the clinical trials have stopped, and they literally had to stop their work. And they literally don't know when the medical system, the healthcare system is going to be ready to start doing tests. And of course, a lot of those companies immediately went into how we can pivot to Corona solutions. And it's amazing. We did a very quick sort of Corona supporting technologies call for proposals. We didn't put a lot of money. It was less than 20 million euros. We got 800 proposals in very different areas, So vaccines and therapies, but also, cultural applications for people stuck at home, a lot of different proposals around coronavirus. So that's why I think there is a lot of opportunity here for creativity around this crisis. But it is definitely different. So many people are looking now how they're going to change their channels, how they're going to switch to low-touch marketing, which I think is going to create a lot of change in our markets.
Thank you. Tony, what were your takes from previous crises?
Similar to Michael and Anya, I think the thing about a crisis is, in retrospect, they were expected, because all the signs were there. We knew the dot-com bubble was going to come. We knew the subprime mortgage crisis was there. If you spoke to anybody, that was deep into the finance sector. And, I was just looking at the Cambridge Business School risk assessment that comes out every year, and a global pandemic has always been top 3 and 4, right? So the key thing that's been a surprise is the fragility of the system, ranging from what Michael said about transport and supply chain and these sort of things through to finance. The knock-on effects are tremendous, and what it shows is just how fragile the system is. So I think that a lot of the stuff, it shows that many of our systems are very reactive and not adaptive, and there's not good mitigation strategies. So I like to look at ventures that have a cause and a cause and a cause, not a direct thing like we're going to move to delivering direct to home rather than retail. These are pretty obvious stuff. So I think there's going to be more stuff around compliance and environmental, social, and governance is going to pick up. Software as a service generally are good businesses because of their resilience and their continuous support. I'm very keen on purpose-driven companies and environment and climate tech. And I think this crisis has given a lot of people a think of a review saying, well, this has happened and we're reacting, but there's even bigger things on their way and we're not reacting at all. So I think climate tech and even things like defense and resilience of infrastructure, these sort of things is going to become very big. And other crises like Michael, I think you mentioned about protection of utility systems and maybe cyber attacks. So I think mitigation and protection is going to become bigger. And we also did a very big important part of this time is the importance of research and development grants for good companies that can win them. It's really important. We are very lucky in the UK. We have Innovate UK, and they were given another £750 million by the UK government, making them 2.75 billion for small companies raising money or getting grants for these initiatives. And they did a COVID application, which was for £50,000, all paid up front with no match funding. And they got 8,400 applicants for this, and which means a 5% success rate. So it's tremendous to see the sort of ideas that come out, ranging from education through to all the way through to point of care. So there is a lot of innovation there, but I think sometimes some pressure necessity is the mother of invention, as they say.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. Michael, how will the increased uncertainty these days in the ecosystem affect startups and their decision making?
every one of us was hit by the crisis overnight, right? So there was no preparation for it. And what happened is actually in the startup sector, we all know this starving of startups. This is our daily business. We are aware of that. However, there's now a big distinction in the crisis time. Also, the good startups are hit where they can't do anything against or less. It just happened to them. In normal life, the good founders survive, and the not so good founder will die. However, when hit by the crisis, even the good founders might be in struggle. And that's why it's so important that that the government is doing some support and is doing a package on helping those startups out of the crisis.
Anya, you related to this before, but does the situation change the investment or the government support criteria?
We made a few changes very, very quickly. So the biggest change is we created very quickly a fast track program. So I agree with my colleagues, it's very important that the government increases the grants, the R&D grants, which is our business. But we also created a fast track. So companies that have less than 12 months runway can get our reply within 4 weeks, which, believe me, it's very fast for us. And they can get half of the money up front, which is twice as much as we usually give up front. But the important thing, I think, when we look at those grants, and we got a substantial amount of new budget for this fast track program. The important change is that we're looking not just at good companies to help them with their plans. We're also looking at how did they adapt to the crisis. And I think I agree with what Tony said. Good founders have to make a change. If somebody comes to us and he's fine, his program is fine, business model is fine, he just has a little delay and needs more cash, this is not what we're looking for. We're looking for people who have made changes, who have looked around, identified opportunities, who made scenarios. I expect to see 3 months, 1 year, 3 year scenarios from every startup, no matter how much money you have, because you don't know what's going to happen. So if you don't know within 3 months, if the crisis is not over, you have to switch gears again. So in this fast track program, we created very quickly an analysis of survivability. And we defined what are we going to look in those companies, how they adapted, how their plans changed, how they're going to reach milestones that will enable them to raise further capital down the line. Because 12 months is not enough, 18 months is barely enough. So this, I think, is the biggest change. We also created some other tools, like a tool encouraging institutional investors to invest in startups. Israeli institutionals traditionally are not so keen to invest in high tech, and usually most of the billions that get invested are foreign money. But we also created a program for that. But I think the most important is very fast reaction. Governments that created real fast response will really help the industry a lot.
Thank you. Tony, do you see any verticals where it will be easier now to gain access to funding? Or and also, where will the setting of a new course be required?
Yeah, there's the obvious ones. I think telehealth obviously is a very important one, but there are more interesting ones that are, so for example, in airlines or travel or logistics, there's been breakpoints, and I think that's the place where the little startup can get in there and take advantage of the disruption. So where a big vertical fails, actually new startups can be created, like the extinction of the dinosaur sort of thing. So I really like the thing about the fast track that Anya mentioned, because we're going to, government intervention, which again has to focus on the right things. You can't just sprinkle taxpayer money anywhere. You have to be very selective. And like any founder or entrepreneur, you've got to look at the small print. So if something, Le Figaro or something says a big billions of euros invested in startups, you have to look what is behind that, and you've got to see, for example, what is the take up of that? what's the speed and simplicity? Because founders, there's one thing they hate more than anything is red tape and bureaucracy. It means I'd rather not take money than have the red tape to fill in forms. And the last one is certainty. So if you say to me you're going to match my round, I have to be absolutely sure you're going to do it and what terms you're going to do it. So everything is in the small print. And I think the UK government has been pretty good in actually interjecting at the right places. So the UKTI thing in research is important, but there's also been the Future Fund, which was £250 million to match investors. And that's been according to certain things, but not for things that had not achieved something. Companies that have some IP, have some traction. So there's something for the government to lose and some workers for the government to lose. But again, I think in terms of sectors, you'll be surprised of the sectors that may come out of this. And I think we mustn't have a broad brush approach to it. There's going to be things coming through that we didn't look at. Generally, I like telehealth. I think compliance and regulations is going to become bigger now. I think generally software as a service. I think environmental and climate is going to become bigger, and these sustainability issues, circular economy. And I think what Michael was saying, that countries are going to want to bring things closer to home a little bit and have some resilience, and so just in time and all of this stuff around efficiency is going to be moved towards more resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, do you expect the investment criteria to change? For example, the stage the company is at, or more deep tech as opposed to other types of technologies? Where do you think this will be going?
I think there's a quick answer, not really. So I don't see a significant change, not in asset class, no in stages of companies. In the investment criteria, I don't see a major change. Maybe a little shift in the fields where investors are seeking to invest, maybe now more in medical technology or things like that. But from the investment criteria, I don't see a change.
Okay. Okay, this is a question to all three of you. In your view, what areas do the startup companies currently require vital support? And what measures is your government taking to provide support? Anya, you related to that a bit. Is there anything else that is relevant here?
Yeah, I think one thing I wanted to add about bureaucracy that Tony so eloquently pointed out, and we're a 30-year-old government organization, so there's plenty of that around. I think the first thing that we heard from companies was be more flexible. You know, as a government, you're not that flexible. Flexibility is not your leading point, but be flexible. So the changes we made seem maybe not important, but for example, we are very flexible today on milestones. Most companies will not meet the milestones that was set for them. We say, okay, float them out. We're very, very flexible on making changes. So you plan to do one thing, now you want to do another thing. We're happy to let you try. So I think I just told somebody this morning that if the only thing that comes out of this crisis that we keep our flexibility, our newfound flexibility, we're in great shape for the future. So I think that's one thing that is pretty surprising that came out of the crisis. And you think about it, it's been what, 3 months? Very short period of time, and quite a lot of changes has happened. So that was another major thing for us.
How about you, Michael? Where do you see these opportunities here for the government to intervene?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned at the introduction, the Austrian startup scene, to my opinion, is very small, and there's too less private capital on the market. And I'm trying to have tenfold on the private capital on the market. So as I mentioned, this 300 to 400 million euros which I invested in Austria, this should be like 2 to 3 billion. It should be 10 times bigger. So the market for venture capital in Austria is too small. And every time the market has a failure, the public has to support or should support this market, which is very well done in Austria. We have very good funding and granting measurements, which is good. However, I Austria would need on the much more risk capital in the market. On the other side, Austria still needs more founders and more companies and more startups to be founded. So we have to push both sides in Austria to help more young people to found their own company and to pump more private money into the market. And at this point of stage, as I mentioned earlier, it's important that the state helps out if there's a lack on the market, which has been done now in Austria, especially in the crisis. We just recently announced a startup package containing of basically two measurements for startups. One was a 50 million fund, which doubles every private euro up to 800,000 euros. So if a startup finds up to 800,000 euros as private equity, then the state is doubling this money up. And the second measure, which was just recently not yet launched but announced, is a VC fund, which we call Runway Fund. It's an own fund up to 50 million, which will be used to help those startups out which cannot raise around due to the crisis. That we call it Runway Fund, to extend the runway of those startups. So these are two measurements especially made for startups in Austria, which is very good and very helpful to help at least a good part of the Austrian startup economy, knowing that we cannot help everybody, and it's a pity for everyone now being killed because of the virus. This is very sad, and however, we try to help at least a big part out of the ecosystem.
Okay. Tony, you also mentioned the actions of British government before. Are private investors involved as much as they should be in these times?
This applies to many countries, not just the UK, but in the UK in particular, we're very good at the very early stage. So because of we've been establishing what's called the SEIS and EIS schemes, which are very strong tax incentive schemes for angel investors. The early, less than €500,000, 250,000 euro level is pretty easy to get in the UK if you have a good team and a good venture with some proof of concept. Then the very large scale-up stuff, Series A, B, C plus, is also very significant. And a huge, like Axo, Atomico, Amadeus, some very strong VCs in the UK. What is always the issue across Europe actually is the Series A crunch, just the pre-Series A, where you're not raising enough and you don't realize, many founders, how much of a metric you have to achieve to get to that Series A round. And most of the interventions have been in that way, and there's always been match funding by British Business Bank and these sort of things for that round. But that is the key area where the angels can't go that far, but many VCs, or the smaller VCs, are coming a little bit earlier stage to pick up these companies. But it's a very competitive ground, and that's where I think the majority of companies will be lost through to this crisis. And that's where it's up to the founders and the teams to really bootstrap or adapt and change, because I think it's worth carrying on, because I think, as Anya mentioned, there's going to be a bounce back. It may take 18 months, 2 years, but there is going to be a bounce back, and they'll be looking around. A lot of the investments are going to be having to deploy, because 2 years will have gone without deployment, and they'll be looking for survivability. And also, as a founder, you do get a get out of jail card for not achieving your metrics, right? Because things change. So we have to look at what else have you done in that time, and how have you adapted, how have you strengthened, how have you re-engaged with your customers, how have you modified your proposition. So if you can bootstrap, adapt, decrease cash flow, and that's where the government is helping tremendously with furlough, with VAT delays, with bounce back loans, which is 0% for a year and 2% thereafter. So a lot of these things are helping with the early cash flow. But I think it's down to the founders to really think about how to extend their runway and do it creatively and opportunistically.
Okay. And yeah, well, moving on from what Tony has said, Anya, we're at the stage where we're giving the startups who are online with us viewing the best tips we can. So ultimately, it must be answered per specific case, but what are the recommended steps for startups at this time? What should be at the focus? What activities should be put on hold or discarded?
Ooh, a whole list. So I think the first thing you have to understand as a startup is that your market has changed. It doesn't matter in which sector you are. Your market has changed and you have to start again. You have to go back, do your product market fit again, reevaluate what your customer discovery is, and focus and tighten your proposal. The second thing, invariably, your business model has changed. Again, almost every sector, every startup will find their business model was changed. It has to change. Something happened. So again, very, very quickly, and it's like, can you do it in 3 days? If you haven't done it until now, you're probably late. So really, really hurry to look at your business model, see how it should change, how it can change, what new opportunities are there. Your channel is probably up there with a change as well. And I leave something for other people to say, but I'll repeat again, the most important thing for the startup or for this founder is the very creative and tight dialogue with his board and his investors. This is not the time for you to think alone and then share something with your board. This is the time to work with your board, to work with your investors. You should bring them scenarios, different scenarios, and they should be telling you what to look. And if your investors tells you don't worry, then you have to start worrying really hard. So nail them. If they say don't worry, we'll support you, great, let's sign something. And get as much money as you can get as fast as possible. Forget valuations. If you have less than a year runway and you have any investment available, I think this is a good time to take it. That's my short list.
Okay, I wonder what the long list looks like.
I have more.
We're nearing the end of our session, and I'd like to leave some time for Q&A, but I'd like Michael and Tony to address two more questions. Michael, entrepreneurship in these times, what are your tips for venture-seeking funding?
Well, at the day of the lockdown in Austria, it was the 15th of March, some of the startup founders switched from their progressive growth to keeping cash. So in the past 2 months, every startup was in good shape, switching from growth to sit on their cash they have. And what happens now these days with this slightly reopening the market, startups can and should come cautiously back to market and market expansion. The past 2 months should have been used for product development, product improvement, if they have time and personal for it. And now what's nowadays, sorry, nowadays is the point to really come back to restart and reopening marketing and sales activities very cautiously. And firstly, and secondly, as Anya already said, it's about the runway. So if your runway is less than 6 months, you should of course very actively come out and seeking money. I think these days we are in a change back to half normal life. So I think now it's the time, if your runway is too short, that you go for the next financing round.
Okay. Tony, we mentioned already at the beginning that every crisis also creates the opportunities. Where do you see these today? Are they in the specific market? Do people need to rethink their market, or do they need to think their business model? Where would you put the emphasis?
It is all case by case. So I'll give you a specific case of an Italian company that's come to the Global Entrepreneur Program. Very, very good founders who bootstrapped to begin with and then raised their first capital in the UK. And they do enterprise messaging for rail workers, infrastructure, security, this sort of things, which is very end-to-end encrypted and very efficient for teamwork to do things. and they saw that Zoom and WhatsApp is taken over, everywhere. But when you look at it, these platforms were the first point to call because of the opportunity and the brand name, etc. But they were broken every single compliance and regulatory rule that you could think of within a medical environment or health environment or finance environment or infrastructure environment. So for them, it's an opportunity to say, I know we had to use these big companies, but this is what we provide, and we're doing a thought leadership workshop. Would you like to join as a compliance officer? Because in every corporation, there's somebody that's having a pain because of somebody doing wrong or something, because they're going to get the buck stops with them, right? So my advice to them is find the chief compliance and chief risk officers and engage with them and say, I know your company's doing this. Do you want to join this thought leadership scheme, etc.? And they've taken really good success on that. So they've gone from doing rail workers and police forces and these sort of things into getting to care homes and these sort of things where they were doing WhatsApp groups, and now they need to develop this sort of stuff as well. So I think it's case by case. You will find that the interesting about this crisis is it's gone long enough, even though it's short, because of the lockdown and the human impact. It's got long enough for people to actually change behaviors and to actually change them potentially long term and forever. So that's something to reanalyze and do. The other opportunity is every day you could be, today I'm in Tel Aviv, this morning, I could have been in London, but this afternoon I'm going to be in Minneapolis. So there's an opportunity with these webinars to really engage and take the opportunity to really understand the VCs and the partners and what their investment thesis is, and engage with them on their topics of interest. Don't randomly send stuff out. That's dead. It's been dead for a long time. You have to really understand who the actual partners are that care about what you're doing, and you've got to know your market, your competition, everything very well, and engage with them and tell them why, in this day and age with this impact, why it's the right time for you and what you're doing about it. And you're much likely to get without having to get on a plane, you can be much more likely to get some sort of response.
Yeah. Guy, maybe I will add one thing that we didn't say. If you're a startup that's really well funded, do go into a growth mode. Now is the time for you to grab the market share. I mean, we only talked about people who don't have money, but if you have money, now is the time. Your customers that probably have time on their hands. They're probably not spending all their time running after burning program. This is a good time to grab a market share and grow.
Thank you for that input, Anya. And now let's move on to the questions from the audience. Michael, startups want government to get out of the way when they're doing fine, but to step in to help in a crisis. How to balance this? And on top of this, how does the government know which startups are viable and have a feasible business model and which don't? I think that's more in Anya's realm.
Well, I mean, the measures which have now been taken recently from the Austrian government, which I briefly explained, is a doubling up of private money. So, and this measurement should be a very quick one. So you apply, and within a few days you should get the money to your account. So there is no long due diligence process from the government. There's no time for due diligence. That's why they ask for some statements of the tax advisor, and that's it. So if a private person, a third private person, believes in a company and puts in new equity money, and a tax advisor is stating a few minor things, then automatically you are applied for this state grant. So this is a very quick measure where the state trust on the third party investor and tax advisor, and of course the founder. So there's no long process, and it's very vital that the startup gets the fund within a few days.
Okay. So Anya, how does the government know which startups are viable and have a feasible business model, which don't?
But this is our business, so we don't do this in crisis. We do it all the time, year long, for 30 years. So we have it's like a factory, we have evaluators, we have criteria. we almost never give money without due diligence. So even if we do fast due diligence, we still do due diligence, and we have criteria. So it depends on the program. So if you're looking to bring innovation into the advanced manufacturing industry, which is part of what we do, so you're looking less at how innovative the project is. You look more on how much impact it can create in that industry. If you're looking at cybersecurity projects, of course, you're looking for how comprehensive the solution is. So if you have something that's very niche or solves part of the problem, it's probably not going to grow into big company. And our goal as a government is to create industry. So we're trying to see, is this company going to be a complete company? So in the past, a lot of Israeli startups used to finish their initial R&D stage and sell the technology. Today, more and more are actually growing to be complete companies, which of course have a much larger impact on the economy.
Okay, thank you.
May I just add one point to the decision making of the government? We have instruments where the government decides where the money goes. However, the instrument where the government only doubles up private decisions, I think this instrument is much better. And fortunately, a lot of those instruments are this doubling up, especially this measurement, which was just launched a few days ago, this COVID Startup Secure Fund. So whenever there is private money going in, the state doubles it up. And I think this is always the best decision if the founder and investors and third parties agree or see a great potential in this company. The state is doubling up. I think this is better as the state takes its own decision.
Absolutely. Everything we do is always matching with the private funds. We never give 100% of anything.
Very good. We internationally agree on that.
Yeah, the demand. I know that a lot of governments do that. We don't, because as you said, you want to see that somebody in the private sector believes in it. And also we have to step back. The demand for our money is too big. So we can come in when the risk is very high, but then we want to step back and have the private sector overtake. So we never give 100%. We always expect, even for very early stage, we will give, for small grants, like $60,000 grants for very early stage, we'll give 85%. The entrepreneur has to put in some money or bring it from somewhere else. So we always want to see participation. You're absolutely right. It's very, very good. And maybe the government, your government will adopt it for the future.
Okay, I have one here. Coming back to Tony mentioning ESG factors, how will this crisis change investors' attitudes towards government and especially towards multilateral governance structures?
I think it's brought the whole thing to light in terms of the fact that being purely financially driven and with quarterly shareholder expectations, I think this covers more the public companies than many others. People are going to want to see, the public and citizens are going to want to see more resilience in the system because, and for example, we talk a lot about the GDP in all these things, and it's probably the worst metric ever invented and probably out of date for many years now, decades. So the inclusive, if we had the inclusive wealth index, for example, we'd be looking at human capital, environmental capital, natural capital, and as well as productive capital. So ESG will have more liability, and there'll be more compliance factors. And what I'm hearing is the re-emergence of the Green New Deal, and these sort of elements are coming through. And I think going right back to what Michael said at the beginning, supply chain has been proven to be quite weak, and people are going to want to see, where did that product come from? How did it get to me? Was it done with slavery? Was it done with poverty alleviation? You know, where did it come from? What was its imprint on the planet? So this is inevitably going to grow and become bigger. And as we see, the human race tends to respond to crises, and there's going to be more crises coming around this vicinity as well. Even the virus was a biodiversity, environmental induced, pathogen. So yeah, there is going to be more stuff on ESG, and even like hedge funds like BlackRock, when they start pushing something, it's going to happen.
Thank you. Well, I see we're nearing the end of our session. I apologize, we have some more questions in the pipeline, but we don't have the time. So we will try and address these offline. I hope we've been able to give you some food for thought to our viewers and an insight on how the ecosystem experts view the current situation and its opportunities. I would like to thank all of our speakers, Anya, Michael, Tony, for joining us today and for your invaluable inputs. And I hope to see you soon again. And to all our viewers, thank you for joining us today. I would just like to add that at the end, there will be a short online questionnaire that will appreciate your input, that will give us some good information to work on. So thank you, everybody, and wish you a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.